Hello Aqua friends, welcome to my channel. My name is Nicole and I have a Misty fall landscape tutorial for you today. Let's talk about supplies. So for the watercolor paper, I like to use arches or the hanamule. I also use some paper towel and a mister bottle for this project. And for the paints, I used bleed proof white, yellow ochre, burnt sienna, burnt umber, sepia, neutral tint, shadow green, permanent sap green, leaf green, and some Prussian blue. I did use a glass dip pen for some texture, a flat angle brush, some round brushes size 8, 6, and a 4, and a script liner brush. Now let's get started. Okay guys, so I started off with a very loose sketch and pencil, just basically where my main trees are going to go so that I have a map to follow. And we're going to start by wetting our first layer really well with some fresh water. And notice I'm just wetting 3/4 of my paper to that water line. I have a very watery mixture of sepia and neutral tints to put in my smoky atmospheric background. With some shadow green, I'm starting to place some of the trees, and I am leaving spaces for the upcoming layers. You also want to leave spaces for the other colors that we're going to be putting in. I added some sepia to the right-hand side where it's darker. And I love dropping in these punches of color here. I have some leaf and sap green that I'm working into the background. You want to vary your colors, especially in the very misty areas. And right here, I'm taking a glass dip pan and taking advantage of that wet paper to scratch in some tree trunks. I'm continuing to add trees to the background using more neutral greens. The shadow green is a very neutral green, and I'm starting to get hard edges. My paper is drying, and I do like this textural difference of having some of these edges not bleeding as much. So I'm going to have to stop soon, putting in as much as I can before I have to let the paper dry. For the middle layer, I use two different approaches. One way of getting soft and hard edges for this middle ground is by using a mister bottle and misting your page first. You'll get some hard edges where there's no droplets of water, and some edges will bleed. Second approach, I start off with wet on dry at the treetops, and I paint down the trees, varying your colors as you go along. And when you get to the base of the tree, you use a clean wet brush to soften those edges and just make that tree disappear into the mist. And it's just a beautiful effect. Okay, I'm sorry about Fig, my bird. He was very quiet until I started talking, and you will hear him chirp in the background. Okay, so how easy is this, guys, to make these misty trees? We just have these very hard edges working wet on dry. You're basically mixing up your colors as you go along, varying your colors, and then taking a clean wet brush to soften the base of the tree so that it just fades away in the mist. And that's how easy it is. Anybody can do this. You don't need talent. It really is easy. Oh my gosh, he's so chatty. Fig. Hey, forest sounds brought to you by Fig. Okay, so I wanted to add a little bit more mist into this middle ground before I let it dry. Got a little bit of burnt umber on my brush. The shoreline is quite warm. I added burnt sienna here. And I know it looks like I wrecked it, but keep in mind it dries lighter. So we'll be adding a lot more warm colors to our foreground trees as well. All right, onto our foreground layer. So this layer actually has a lot of layers of trees within the third layer, if that makes any sense. I have to build up the softer undertone under brush and under small trees. So I'm adding in some warm greens, and I mixed in a little bit of yellow ochre to get these more olivey tones in the background trees. So as I'm building this layer, I will be adding more defined tree trunks. I'll be adding a lot more branches and, of course, darker shades. So the brush area I have wet on wet because there's a lot going on there, and I just kind of want that area to bleed together. I'll be adding a lot of textures in there with branches and such. Coming in with my olivey greens here. Like I said, I just mixed a little bit of yellow ochre with my saccharine to get that color. Okay, here's one of the big trees that I'm starting on, and notice I'm going quite dark here. This is my foreground tree. It's going to be the darkest and the most detailed. So I still want to vary my colors, and I'm coming in with some lighter tones halfway down my tree. So I'm drawing in my trunk, drawing in exactly where this next tree is going to be, continuing with the foliage in the same manner. Now there's a lot of trees in the back of this large tree, and I do want a lot of color back there. So I'm adding in some softer greens and going with a wetter mixture. So you see I'm still having that a lost and found edge approach even in my foreground trees. Now with the script liner brush, I am adding in all these tiny detailed branches. Now for this lone tree on this little clump of land here, it has a hazy background of this limey green that is just beautiful. So I thought it would be a good approach to put in all the branches first with my script liner brush. And then once it dries, I just did a very light wash of the green behind it, and it actually turned out really pretty, I think. So I'm drying that so that I could add that green. So see, I just wet it and added some leaf green to the background. Very watery mixture. Just adds that punch of color. Now for the lake, I am using Perusian blue, very watery mixture for the base color. But the local color of this painting is really very neutral greens. And so I'm doing dry brushing with my flat brush using those shadowy olivey greens. If I did this part in blues, it wouldn't look right because that's not the local color of the scene. It wouldn't look natural. So I'm putting in some of the reflections. Now I need to soften those brush strokes because they're a little too harsh. So I'm just softening it, but you still have that dry brush look. Pulling up some of the pigment where I want some highlights. So I'm wetting my horizon line where I need to add the contrast. This area under the trees is quite dark, and I want those pigments to bleed. I'm taking a wet brush and I am coaxing that pigment upwards and blending it into the tree line. With a round brush, I'm taking my neutral greens and I am doing some more dry brushing on the lake. To steady your hand, I like to use my pinky finger, and I let my pinky finger guide me across the page. So I'm adding in all the branches that I see, and I'm using a script liner brush so that I get very fine detailed lines. So I'm darkening up some of the tree trunks and adding these final touches in this fourth layer. So in the reference photo, there are some birch trees that are in the background and in the foreground. And I grew up with a lot of birch trees in northern Canada, and I just absolutely love these trees. So I am adding those in with some white gouache. I like to use P.H. Martin's bleed proof white. I like to soften the base of these trees as well, so I am hitting them with a little bit of a damp brush. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like my artwork, please subscribe and hit that like button. Tell me what you guys think about this painting in the comments below, and I'll see you next week.